Opus 4.5 kind of blew the doors off of like, if you didn't see it coming, it's here. Sorry. I think people are picking models because it's someone that they want to work with rather than I'm picking this model because benchmark score. The harness doesn't matter as much as it used to. You can kind of use whatever harness you want to talk to these things. Like the difference between asking Warp a question through Codex and asking OpenCode a question through Codex is really small difference.
Hey, Ben, thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to start with a simple question, which is, who are you and what do you do?
So I'm a developer relations lead at Warp. So I do a whole combination of building a bunch of tools with AI to help out the team, working with everyone who's using Warp out in the community or out in industry, and been working on sort of the future of how you hold agents both locally and on the cloud. I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that stuff today.
Sure, I think we will. But before we get into that, I've noticed you're very good at talking on camera, just explaining things really well. And it's not a common thing that people have. So what led you into that direction and how did you develop that skill?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing content about programming for a while, at least a while to me, as long as I've been like in industry. So started back in like pandemic times when everyone was bored at home looking for things to do. And I was working on a side project at the time that was stitching on a JavaScript bundler to a framework called 11D. This is way back in the day. Still a great framework. And I wanted some way to communicate what I was building in a way that didn't feel dry. So normally I would see people post like a link to their changelog or their README on Twitter to post updates on what they're doing. And I wanted to do something that was more of a video format. I've been doing blogging up until that point. I just wanted to try something different. So I had a whiteboard in my closet and a Rock Band microphone. That was the only microphone I had. But it had USB. So I was like, okay, I can plug this in to my computer and it works as a microphone. So I propped up the whiteboard on a chair. I wrote up the changelog on the board instead of doing it as like a actual written post. And I just like walked through all the features and then I jumped to a demo and I posted it. And people really liked the format. I mean, the library did all right. I mean, it had some cool ideas in it. It's actually what led me to work on Astro, which is an open source framework that I maintained for a few years. But it kind of showed me, first off, like the developer community is very small and very welcoming to anyone who's working on cool stuff. And also, there is room for like intermediate dev content that's very showy and YouTube focused, like you're on camera and you're talking about things. So that eventually led to me doing a lot of content creation about just general web development concepts, like best practices using HTML, talking about all the libraries that have been floating around, like SvelteKit and Solid and Nuxt and HTMX. And I just did like 2 short videos a week for like many years. Or 2 years, I think, something like that, where I was like doing it really consistently. And yeah, it just builds up a muscle when you do that over and over again. And it also forces you to learn things if you do it in short form 1-minute bursts, which is what I've been doing. I haven't really done as much long form. It's been a lot of like short form, 1 minute problem solution. Let's talk about how this thing works. So just through all of that, you learn skills of like self-editing, you learn what people actually care about, and you kind of drill more into those topics. And right now I'm trying to sort of steer that from deeply technical, let's talk about how this library works, to now you're using agents at this higher level of abstraction. Let's talk about some strategies there and also where things are heading tooling-wise in that space.
I was going to say, I think a lot of people will know you from your whiteboard shorts. I actually think that's the reason my personal website was written in Astro. I think that's how I first discovered you when you were at Astro. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Astro and what you did over there.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I was honestly surprised because my content was so scattershot. Like I was just excited by all the frameworks that were going on and continue to, like huge Svelte user, Vue's doing interesting stuff, Solid's doing interesting stuff. And since Astro supports every like rendering framework, it's easy to just talk about all of them and say, yeah, this is part of the job. We support everything. So let's talk about everything. But it's cool that the Astro message still kind of landed, even if I'm not explicitly talking about it all the time. I think that's something I've learned also, like working on Warp right now, is just be generally useful in the community, and people will notice what you're doing. Like, you don't have to be silly to talk about this stuff. In fact, you shouldn't be. You should just like pick up on, hey, this is useful. Let me try to explain it. So yeah, it's been going well.
I think one of the most popular videos you've done on YouTube is the one where you go through the basics of React Server components, or you build it from scratch. What's your honest view on React Server components? Because it hasn't, I mentioned this to Evan Yu when we interviewed him, but it hasn't been the slam dunk that people thought it was going to be. And so, yeah, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I haven't opened that box in a little bit because I didn't really use, again, it's another case of there's clearly a lot of confusion in the community about what this thing even does under the hood. So let me just try to understand it. And as a nerd, I just went down the rabbit hole of reading source code and figuring it out. So yeah, that video you mentioned started as like a conference talk that I did at React Summit. This was back, I think 2 years ago. And then I adapted it to a YouTube video while it was fresh and I could just kind of rattle it off. And yeah, it got a lot of interest because people still didn't know how it worked. And it was kind of an intro to how it does things. And since then, I mean, it seems like Next.js is still like the most used framework. And if you ask an agent to build something for you, it's only going to accelerate what is most popular in the training set. So that's created a flywheel for Next.js for apps to just kind of proliferate. I agree, like on the tech stack side, it's not like this universal solve. And also because it blends the lines between what is running on the server versus the client. As a human reading it, it's hard to tell unless you're looking at the directives at the top of the file or inside of the server functions. So you can forget where you are. And that was always a problem. Like I remember like isometric JavaScript being like a really big term where you want to write JavaScript that could run on a server or on a client. And by authoring that way, you forget where it is running and what the implications of each space is. And there are very different implications of this runs on a serverless function that runs once versus this runs on the client and it's stateful as long as the person has a website open. So I do feel like, yeah, they could have drawn clearer boundaries on where everything lives. I know the goal is to just make the super abstraction that does everything. And at least working on Astro's APIs, we kind of rejected that. And we said, no, there should be clear lines. Like I actually got to lead like the Astro Actions project, which is kind of like server functions, but for Astro's case, and also something that could work in any framework. So it was like, instead of tying this to like some React runtime where you have JSX on the server, JSX on the client, we're going to have this like actions file explicitly named as a file on your file system. You can't just put them anywhere. You can export handlers for functions. And then you get like a magic import that you can use to grab those as functions you can call on the client. And they're just async functions that you could call from Vue. You could call it from like a web component. You could call it from anywhere. And there are resources out there on like how Astro Actions work, if anyone's curious about that. But it was like studying what people liked and didn't in the ecosystem. It felt like, yeah, people want clearer boundaries. We wanted to be easy to have TypeScript that works across the wire, because that was kind of the appeal. But we didn't want it to feel like you're forgetting where you are when you're authoring code and leaving it up to the like user to organize all of their code either. We wanted like organization to be clear, boundaries to be clear. We still get the benefits of TypeScript and type-safe form data and all that other stuff that Server Actions was giving you. So it's just a philosophical thing, really. I think it's a super powerful framework. It's just for legibility and reviewability. I feel like drawing lines is a little bit smarter.
You know, I really liked the server island approach that Astro took, and I think they did a sort of great job on making that pretty clear and, yeah, specifically identifying like this component is on its own, it's part of the server, and the rest of the website is still sort of SSR and rendered. It was yeah, that's why I use Astro. As I said, I'm a big fan of what Astro did. So
yeah, that was something Matt Kane proposed as soon as he joined. He worked on Gatsby for a while, so he has a ton of perspective on static site generation. Yeah,
that's funny because my site went from Gatsby to Astro, so that explains why.
A lot of people's did.
Yeah.
it was a target. Is what we wanted people to do, especially when Gatsby was like no longer maintained. Even Netlify was supporting us in that, like, hey, let's get some Gatsby users onto Astro because it's awesome. But yeah, server islands are a really cool abstraction, and they're cool because it's really simple. Like, I know in Next.js you have to do a lot of hoops to, if you wanted something to only render on the client, or you wanted certain things to be like statically rendered and certain parts of the page to be dynamic. Like, the classic example is you have a blog post, but just the button and the like counter should actually be a server call. The rest of the page can just be rendered when you built the website. If you wanted to have that kind of relationship in Next.js, you had to sort of invent magical runtimes that can do this, that really depend on the host whether it'll work. And Astro was like, yeah, server islands are just like a fetch function, but we make the syntax a little nicer. That's literally all it is. So it's like this part of the page, instead of it being like rendered when you build the website, it's just going to be a fetch function under the hood. And it's going to fetch the like button count. And then it's going to render this HTML and put it in there as soon as the website's loaded. Like, that's all it does. There's really nothing fancy about it. If you use something like HTMX, it's that, but like a baby version. That's admittedly less capable, but in my eyes, easier to understand. And that really caught on because it's so easy to deploy it anywhere. You don't really have to think about it. And it's just HTML, so you're not thinking about what bundler am I using. It just kind of works. So I just like how we found simple solutions like that, just to make it easier to build stuff.
Yeah, but now that agents are writing most of the code, how much of that really matters?
Yeah, man, I know. So last year was an existential crisis, I think, for all of us. Some people are having that existential crisis now. I empathize. Opus 4.5 kind of blew the doors off of like, if you didn't see it coming, it's here. Sorry. I knew what was going on pretty early. As soon as I was trying cursor tab completions and it was doing more and more stuff for me, I was like, there's some inevitability here of where we're heading. It's no longer the Copilot tab completions. This is getting serious. So like, yeah, I mean, I joined Warp last year, which is the terminal with, it's a really nice to use terminal that has agents built in and also cloud orchestration. There's many chapters to the Warp journey. We help you all the way up the stack, kind of like how Astro helped you all the way from static to server. Warp is kind of like extending up in that way. But I joined Warp as like early as when Sonnet 3.5 was out. And it was barely capable. They gave me one tech demo internally in the interview. And the agent just kind of ran in a circle and crashed. And that was a demo. And I was like, okay, we're starting with something here. But I could see like the tool calls where it was actually writing files on a system. I was like, oh, that's different. So we're not like opening the file anymore. It's opening the file and doing stuff. And then I review it on the back half. And it wasn't really capable at the time, but then it became very capable later. And all of that definitely had me thinking, like, how valuable is API design in this new world? Like, I spent 3 years designing APIs at Astro, as did the rest of the core team, and continues to. But if agents can hold all of these things and understand them, how valuable is the API design? I feel like it's still really valuable for, like, can the agent pick up on patterns quickly? Or is it going to waste a lot of compute trying to look up documentation and running around in circles? I feel like as compute gets cheaper and cheaper, that will be less and less of a problem. I'm not going to pretend like, yeah, perfect API design will always matter, always and forever. Like, no, the cost of it will get lower and lower and lower until like you're getting microsecond improvements by improving the API. Right now we're at like, you can cut down a 2-hour agent job to like 20 minutes or 10 minutes if the API is designed well, which means it's still valuable. And you actually need to think about this stuff. At some point, it may change to like, it took 100 milliseconds, now it takes 20 milliseconds if models get that fast. But at least in this like window we're looking at for the next year or two, like good API design still matters. So I do feel like, yeah, the frameworks that we're building these agents on top of, it'll be diminishing returns maybe, but I do think it matters if the agent's able to hold well-made tools versus poorly made tools to get something done.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. If the API is well written enough for the agent to understand, they can navigate through it quickly, make changes quickly, understand it quickly, and therefore be better at helping you build it.
Usually, yeah.
gonna say any tool essentially that was easier for a human is going to be easier for an agent as well. And I think obviously humans still being in the review process a bit at the moment, it's nice when it's well-written code that you can understand at a quick glance. So tools like that definitely help.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it feels like every tip I see on good prompting is just tips on software engineering. Like, it's not even that different. I think there was one recently about like, stop having a big Claude MD that describes your code base, organize your code better. Yeah, that's how we wrote readmes, right? Like, it's bad to have 1,000-line readme. You should have like a 20-line one where the code mostly explains itself and you document at the touch points and split modules at correct boundaries. Like, nothing's changed really. Like, if you have more of a rat's nest, it'll be harder for it to navigate. And right now, these agents are still like pretty slow at getting everything done and very compute intensive. So it does matter if you cleaned up your house before you have visitors, if that makes sense as a metaphor. I don't know.
Yeah, it makes sense. I was going to say, going back to Warp, so I was a heavy Warp user for years, and I think I was always really impressed at how Warp looked and felt. It was a terminal that felt like an IDE because you could see tooltips and the menu was easy to navigate through. You didn't have to do a lot to configure it. And I've slowly moved away from Warp for various reasons, but I think the premise of it being a terminal that you can use AI with to do your code and even view the code inside the terminal is really impressive. And I haven't messed about with Oz yet, but I like the direction you guys are going in. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, and I will pick your brain on why you're doing things other than Warp right now.
Happy.
I do want to know.
About it, yeah.
It's everything is a user call. But yeah, like general high level stuff. Yeah, you touched on Warp sort of helping you with everything that's around the agent harness. So like you can open a terminal and use Claude Code and it works. It can edit code. You can look at the output. You can ask it to run the dev server, all that stuff. But if you wanted to review the code that Claude wrote, for instance, well, you might need to open Git Desktop or LazyGit or even the Claude Desktop, like any tool that you would want to use. And if you wanted to add context on like, here's the file or the directory that I need to put in, you could run some terminal commands to like list out all the stuff inside of the project, find the file name with like the @ mention where you say like @ file and then you put it in. You can do all of that stuff, but it feels like it's just kind of part of the story. Like Claude Code is an access point that you can use to talk to an agent, but there's still all this stuff around it, like the code review process, the context gathering process. Editing Markdown is weirdly very important now. So like editing skill files, opening your agent's MD, that stuff kind of matters too. And Warp is just kind of like, can the app do all of that? Instead of you jumping around a bunch of different tools or installing a bunch of CLI equivalents like TUI applications. So that's why we started doing things that aren't really what terminals are supposed to do, like putting a file explorer on the left and putting a code diff view on the right. Feels a lot like VS Code if you have everything open in Warp, but it's all progressive disclosure. Like you can hide it and just use it as a terminal if you want. But most of my day, I have like the file tree pulled up, and I have the code diff view that I sort of expand out whenever an agent's done. We let you like edit the code diff as well. We added LSP support, so it has like hover hints and stuff, like a real editor. We went hard. But you can like, even at the simple level of just, I want to review the code the agent wrote, you can pop open a diff view inside of your terminal. You can leave comments. So you can like hit a little button to leave a comment on a line and say, this doesn't make sense to me. Can you explain this? Send it to the agent and then it'll just kind of pick up on that comment for you. So it's easier to like have a iteration loop with an agent when you tie sort of the environment to the agent itself. And as I said, like all this stuff is inside of a terminal still. So what we're playing with is like, yeah, we have this diff view, this file view, but you don't have to use the Warp agent to use all of that stuff. You can, and the Warp agent does have like a really nice GUI around it to easily like look at Git diffs and things like that. But if you want to use Claude Code, and then you wanted a nice diff view and a file tree to drag in context, you can do that in Warp really easily. And we have like a tool belt that lets you open all those menus, a way to enter voice mode, an image uploader. We're also playing with that code comments feature I just talked about where you can like leave comments in a diff view. We want that to forward to the Claude Code CLI or the Codex CLI as well. So we're experimenting with that. So unlike stuff like Cursor, where it's all owned by Cursor, like everything end to end is owned by that tool. In Warp, we really just own the stuff around the harness. So if you wanted to run any agent like Pi or Codex or any of those, you can. But we still have the diff view and the file view and all that stuff to help you like work with the agent. So it's a really unique spot of being like a terminal plus plus that you can run all these agents inside of, and then like you get some nice helpers on top without you having to install or configure all that yourself.
You know, I'll be honest. I was similar to Richard in I used to use Warp. I don't think there was any reason I left more than it was just the time where there was so many tools coming out that you sort of just hop between loads of them. And I think obviously one of my original problems was that I still liked VS Code when it had like tab complete and all of that at the time. But I'm finding less and less that I am using an IDE now, like VS Code and Cursor. So I definitely need to check out Warp again because it sounds like you've added a lot to it that helps the modern day sort of development flow.
I'm going to say I'm an avid Warp user and I love using it. Yeah. And my question is, with everything that's going on right now and everyone's coming up with their CLI tools and everything, do you think like TUIs are the way to go, the way of the future, and IDEs will disappear and TUIs will just take over the entire industry?
I mean, no. I mean, they're fun. They're fun to use. I do think like for a near-term solution of like, oh, we were given these coding agents and they live in a CLI. What's the easiest way to build tooling around it? More CLIs. Let's just wrap it with tmux. Let's wrap it with, I saw cmux come out recently, which is like a ghosty extension that gives you like vertical tabs and stuff. This is getting us thinking about like, should Warp have vertical tabs and all that? I hope we do. So people are doing crazy stuff. And TUIs are kind of the quickest interface to just do that without leaving the terminal where you're already living. Warp is the harder path of like, let's actually build a GUI around this. So you need to go deeper into the terminal itself to add all of these tools. So that's the path we're taking. And I think we progressed from bash prompts in the 80s to using clickable interfaces shortly after. I don't really see that being any different now. Like the appeal of being able to click and your cursor moves, you know, it's pretty useful to be able to move your cursor like that instead of using your keyboard to do it. Of course, keyboard warriors will disagree, but yeah, I think it's intuitive to click around and have like expandable menus and stuff like that. So it's smarter to just use like a GUI instead of using a TUI as like a rendering engine of its own. But I do think somewhat. I learned Vim right at the tail end of like when that was worth learning. It might be worth learning today. I learned it a few years ago. And then I got more used to navigating around with the keyboard. I like shortcuts and all that, but like scrolling around a diff view and leaving a comment, I don't want to use a bunch of like one letter shortcuts to do all of that. I would much rather scroll through the diff, click on the line, leave a comment. Like it just kind of makes sense. And I know TUIs can be interactive. Like I have seen ones that use interactive modes that you can click on things, but you can still deal with like rendering flashes when it's like, because it's literally like re-rendering the whole page over and over and over again. That's how TUIs work. So there's a fundamental limit to that. There's also a limit to what you can display. Like you can do gradient animations and stuff like that. But again, it's not like the best rendering engine to do that sort of thing. It's better if you can just like actually use a rendered native GUI to do that. So I feel like the answer is, of course, we're going to go to a GUI. Is it going to be an IDE though? Probably not. We're probably not going to have it with like the full code editor where you have to wait for it to index before you can really use the tool. Like all of that waiting doesn't make much sense because I just want to talk to an agent right away. That's like the main interface. And then everything else like a diff view or a file view are supplementary. So to be like agent first, all of that stuff is debugging. And I feel like that's what Warp's doing. Like we're literally walking in that direction of like the agent's the first thing you see, but the file editor and the diff view are like the second thing that you open up after you're debugging what it's doing.
Yeah, I must admit, I'm a GUI type of person, so I'm a big fan of GUIs. I love the sort of Codex app recently that OpenAI came out with. I think now that we're getting into multi-agent, it just makes more sense to me to be a GUI that I can click about in. I've never sort of enjoyed the terminal for more than one or two agents. I know I've never been a keyboard warrior, I must admit. So Yeah, I do think we'll go back to GUIs at some point, but yeah, as you said, it probably won't be an IDE.
Yeah. How you liking the Codex app, by the way? Are you using it in like your workflows yet, or just experimenting?
I enjoy it a lot for sort of vibe code experiments at the moment. I must admit, I haven't sort of used it too heavily, but it's just been very nice to have sort of multiple agents open at the same time and seeing them all in the sidebar, what they're doing, and sort of clicking around. And the Codex model has been sort of very good. It's sort of my favorite coding one at the moment. It just sort of understands what I mean, and it's sort of hard to describe how it's better than Opus 4.6 sometimes, because obviously everyone has their own favorite model, but it's just sort of the way it feels. And I think it's just, as I said, everything's well integrated in that app, and I'm having to check code less and less, which is worrying. But obviously, some of the apps I develop, I don't actually need to check the code because they're quick demos. So it's, I don't need to worry about security or anything. I do still think humans need to check code on production apps.
Yeah, we definitely check our code at Warp as well. Although we did set up an agent to check our code too. And I think that's a pretty common pattern at this point of like have an agent write the code, have a different agent review all the code, either as a GitHub action, which you can set up with like the Oz system that we've been building, or just having the agent review its work locally. Like both of those work pretty well. I've actually done that where I just start a new conversation in the same directory and I have a saved prompt. I could probably make it a skill at this point. It's like, just review the code the other agent wrote and make sure it's PR ready, simplify where it makes sense, yada, yada. It knows how to do a code review. And
actually, I'm curious about this. So do you use the same models for reviewing and writing, or do you find that there's a model that's better at reviewing code versus writing it?
Yeah, so I use the same model. We ask this all the time. And everyone thinks they've cracked the code in our like user groups. If someone's like, I only use Claude Opus for plans, and then I switch to Codex to execute. Then the next person says, I only use Codex to write a plan. Why would you use Opus? And then I use Opus to execute on the plan because that's the best model for execution. It's like, it really just depends on like the type of code that you like reviewing, I guess, because they do write different flavors of code. I've noticed like there are differences.
Yeah, but the reason why I'm asking is, like, if you use the same model to review the code that the same model wrote, there's kind of like a bias, you know, in the code quality.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I thought, like, as long as you start a new conversation, you don't have the bias of past context, which is good. It's kind of like two people who work the same way reviewing each other's work versus, I guess, people who work different ways. So it could make sense to, like, switch your model before you review something. Is that what you do?
Yeah, I haven't like established like a workflow for it, but that's what I've tried, and it's an interesting experiment to see, you know, how different trained models communicate with each other.
I was going to say, I've always sort of thought it's a bad UX, though, to rely on the user to know what model is best at everything. And I don't know if this might be a hot take, but I think obviously we're very early days at the moment, so I think it's fine. But I do see why tools like Cursor and that lot have the auto mode, because I think to sort of less individuals who are online all the time reading about new model updates and everything, like they don't want to be thinking about, oh, I need to use Opus to plan, or I need to go to Codex for the code because it's better at that. They just want one thing that does everything for them. So yeah, that was just sort of my random rant. I think that UX might go in the future, essentially.
Yeah, it might. And we have an auto mode as well for that sort of reason. People who don't want to pick anything. We do break down the auto model based on what you value. So we have cost efficient, responsive, and genius. So like cost effective is what you expect. It might take longer. Usually it routes to like I think it's an earlier GPT model that's like safer on tokens, but may take longer to complete. Then there's responsive in the middle and genius, which I believe routes to either Opus or Codex 5.3. It always depends which one's actually going to be like better output. But yeah, I think that makes sense for people who don't want to think about the choice. I mean, all of us here are terminally online, so we're all interested in a model picker that can let you try these things out. It's another reason I really value like general purpose harnesses, which are popping up and becoming more important. Cursor's one of them, Warp's one of them. Also tools like Copilot and Pi are examples as well. OpenCode, of course. because it's useful to be able to try all these things. It's useful to experiment with like who's better at which task for our team. Because again, all these models have like different flavors, but they can still get things done. Like the way I describe it is Codex is kind of like German engineering. Like it gets everything detail oriented and exactly right. But as soon as I ask it for like function names and code comments, they're super mechanical and not how I would do things. It also takes longer because it researches forever. And Opus is kind of like the grad student at Georgia Tech that's up at 2 a.m., but they're getting things done. They're moving fast. Their code's super readable because they actually kind of talk more like a human. That's totally like, people have different opinions on it, but I do think because of how much that's resonated and how many times I've seen that sort of take, I think people are picking models because it's someone that they want to work with to anthropomorphize it, rather than I'm picking this model because benchmark scores. I think we're kind of past that point. I don't think people are picking models because of benchmarks alone anymore.
You know, I definitely agree with that because we cover a lot of model releases on our channel, and sort of at a certain point, like 6 months ago, I just flash the benchmarks up now and I move on because it's like I don't think you care that it's 1% better than the last model. It's like, have they added any new features? Is it quicker maybe? Because I think that's still something people care about, is sort of speeding these models up a bit. But yeah, I think benchmarks are a little less obvious, especially now that they clear so many of the easy benchmarks. It's only really difficult benchmarks that seem to matter now. And it's sort of hard to explain the benefits of one model over another to people without them just using it for a week and then using another one. It's very hard to pick a favorite model. And as you said, you see so many opinions on Twitter of which one is best for what workflow. So I'm curious how sort of Warp chooses what is best in the auto mode. When a new model comes out, do you have your own sort of suite of benchmarks you run internally to decide if it should be upgraded and things?
Yeah, we do. We have a eval suite. We have a set of benchmarks that are more like industry standard ones, like SweetBench Pro, just to validate. We also do have some auto routing in there. So if you ask a very simple question in your terminal, like, can you handle this git rebase for me? Which actually might be kind of complicated. If it's a simple one, like revert this commit, like I forgot the command. Like people use that in Warp all the time, just because you can ask in plain English, revert this commit, and then it runs some commands. For that, we route to like a simpler model, either Haiku or Sonnet, I believe. And then if it has planning mode, for example, like if you requested a plan, that should probably go to a smarter model that reasons. If it's like a longer horizon coding task, it'll go to a reasoning model as well. But choosing which reasoning model, yeah, it's tough because it was easy to answer that up until very recently when Codex and Opus became very comparable to each other. So at this point, I do think it's going to be a combination of, yeah, the benchmarking, but also user feedback. Because if you switch out one for another, users will say, like, this feels different. It doesn't talk to me the same way. What'd you do? What's in the sauce? This is different. So I think that kind of forces tools to like be a little more consistent. And I have wondered how tools like AMP navigate this, because I've seen them switch between Gemini and Opus and Codex throughout different eras of their coding harness. And I'm curious how people feel about that, because it does feel like you're talking to a different person when you make those kinds of switches. For us, we've just kind of kept it consistent because same benchmarks, but keeps the feel consistent. Let's use Opus. I believe that's what we've been doing. But there will come a fork where we have to decide, like, is the 5% benchmark improvement worth it to have a different voice? I don't know.
I was going to ask if you can use open source models with Warp, or is that something you can do or not?
You can't use like your own models. We have bring your own key if you want to use like Anthropic, Gemini, OpenAI, Bedrock, I believe. We do have GLM. That's the extent of it, but we haven't opened it up to like general or local model support. Not that it's not tracked. I know it's like the top voted feature to have like local model support. So it is definitely on the roadmap. We have a quality team that maintains both the benchmarks I was talking about and also new model releases. So yeah, it is heard that we want to get that in there.
Do you have an integration with OpenRouter?
We do not. What would that look like? What would you want to say there?
Because like with OpenRouter, you can choose whatever model you like, and the library is just huge. So that would be, I don't know, if you could get that feature in, that would be amazing.
I suppose a problem becomes models are so different at making tool calls, and if they actually work with tool calls, that you'd have to nearly verify every single model, which is obviously an impossible task. Because I know obviously people say Gemini is pretty bad at following tool calling rules and things. So
you could whitelist some of the models, don't have to use all of them.
Yeah, whitelist, but allow you to bring that key just so you have that
Exactly.
flexibility.
Yes.
That totally makes sense. Yeah. But on what you were saying, yeah. I was just going to say, like, Codex, for example, took a while to actually get in there. We were a full, 3 weeks late, which is an eternity. People are just shouting at the door, where's Codex? And it's because Codex is really specific about the tool calls that it wants. I think 5.3 improved that a bit, but we just plopped Codex in our harness, and it did not perform well. It just felt like it wasn't updating us. It searched the web for 5 minutes when it definitely shouldn't. So we had to figure out, how do you tune this harness to actually get the performance that the Codex team is getting out of their CLI? So we did it. We put in the work and we made it work in our harness, but it wasn't as simple as we just added the model to the list. That it sometimes is that simple, but for certain flavors like Codex or Gemini, it's not.
When you mentioned about Warp, that's why I've left Warp. I think everyone's kind of answered or alluded to that slightly, but there was a time when I used OpenCode in Warp, and I was a fan of OpenCode. And Kimi came out. I was like, oh, Kimi looks like a really cool model. And I tried it in OpenCode, and I was thinking, why am I using Warp to open OpenCode? Because I was using Warp with subscription, and I was using Sonnet and the Claude models with Warp. But then when I started to use other models, so like Kimi and Quen, GLM, they didn't support Warp. And so I thought, well, I might as well use a regular terminal if I'm going to be using those models, because it's easier for me just to use that than to use OpenCode inside Warp. So yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, that makes sense. You didn't want to reach for the Warp harness anymore. You wanted to use OpenCode. So you had that access and you could use whatever, like Kimi 2.5. I know that one's a really cool model that they jumped on. And yeah, you were mentioning pricing if you're paying for both. That makes a ton of sense. And we hear that feedback. I do know, you can just, use the Warp free version. The app just kind of works. So if you want to keep using it to run OpenCode, you can just do that. And you still get the voice mode and the file diff and all that stuff. But if none of it's useful, you try it out and you're like, I don't reach for this, then it makes total sense. So yeah, I get that.
I think one of the biggest complaints that I've heard you guys get is, why have a terminal with a login page? I think that's the biggest one I hear. You
don't need to log in. You can use Warp without a login, but it's that first impression that sticks, man. People are like, when are you going to get Windows support? And I'm 2 years ago. We've had Windows support, but it burst on the scene as the Mac terminal you log into. So I don't know. But I get it. Yeah. Why log in if you're not going to use the Warp agent and all that stuff? We do have other things file storage. If you want to store commands, store planning documents, I do that. Just so I don't have to commit the code. You can put a planning document in what's called the Warp drive to save it. These are small things. It really depends on what you want to do. So maybe Warp with no login. Maybe. I don't know.
I suppose it's sort of to get people to stop thinking that Warp is just trying to compete with Ghosty. It's got a load of other things in it, and it's sort of a new environment for the agentic world of development. But yeah, I see that people probably got stuck on that opinion when Warp first came out, when it was just sort of AI in the terminal, that it's trying to compete with those. So I guess it's the messaging around then, and yeah. Unfortunately, as you said, first impressions do stick, so sorry about that. Hopefully we can change some minds here.
Yeah, and we're honest about we don't really compete with Ghosty because we don't look at them as the same kind of tool. Ghosty is the very lightweight terminal where you're going to stitch on all of your plugins. You're going to build your own little universe inside of there, use TUIs, use things like that. If that's what you value, then you should use Ghosty 100%. There's no reason. Warp is I don't want to stitch those tools together. I kind of if you could just bring me a diff view and a file explorer and a voice input button, and it's just kind of there, and I don't have to configure it. And as long as I just use the free tier, I could use OpenCode if I want to as well. If that's your mentality, it's I just want the GUI. I don't want to stitch together a bunch of TUI applications, then Warp is that option for you. I look at kind of like NeoVim versus VS Code. It's not as dramatic as that, but it's the same ethos, I feel like, of where people gravitate and what they end up using.
Are you able to go into what Oz is? Obviously, I think that's quite a new release for Warp. And I'm curious sort of what that's doing for cloud agents now.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Oz came out like a couple weeks back, and it is the platform for running agents in the cloud. So we, of course, have been using agents to build Warp for a while. And some things we ran into were, it's really nice to use agents to author the code locally. But as soon as you get to like repetitive tasks or last mile tasks like code review, the agent doesn't follow you to those places. It stays on your machine. And that feels a bit limiting. We're also hitting some parallelization issues of I could actually work on multiple backlog tickets or user feedback requests at the same time. And I don't really need to kick these off on my machine and monitor them. Agents have gotten good enough that I could ramp out a small feature request or a bug report and feel pretty confident at the end just looking at the code diff. So in those cases, like spinning stuff up locally doesn't make a lot of sense. We want this place where you could just run an agent and trigger it from anywhere. So I mentioned like opening up a pull request. Like there should be a way to just trigger an agent from a GitHub action, have it review the code just in time. If you're dealing with user feedback in Slack or Linear, there should be a way to just tag an agent and trigger it that way. And then you review the pull request that gets linked on the other side. And then just general purpose stuff. Like we built our own sort of issue triage bot internally that can just go through all the Warp issues on GitHub. And we wanted to build something that was like a TUI. So like a full application to go through all of our issues and just trigger agents from there. So we're like building our own mini Warp that's focused on GitHub. And for that, you need like an SDK or a REST API. So you're like building an app that triggers an agent to do whatever it needs to do inside of that app. And then just get updates and display them to the user. So that meant like having this whole surface of like REST API, SDK, Slack and Linear triggers, GitHub action triggers, all that stuff. And the core of it being you have a sandbox where the agent runs, which is called an environment. So all of that is rolled into what we're calling Oz, which has all of those things that I mentioned. It helps you set up environments to run agents not on your machine. So if I were to be on my phone, the dream scenario of like I get a message from someone, I want to implement this feature and I don't want to go to my computer, I should be able to just kick off an agent inside of that environment I've set up, have it do its work, and then I get a link to the pull request to look at. And then have another coding agent review that code in the pull request so I can like ship changes to that, because why not? So that's kind of what we built towards. So, and the reason we called it Oz instead of like Warp for the cloud is first like make it its own thing. First impressions are sticky. Warp is the terminal. So we need to have a different name for this concept because it is very unique. And also we want to make it really accessible even if you're not using the Warp terminal. Like we have some niceties to tap into everything going on in these cloud runners from the Warp terminal, but it's just a CLI. Like in Ghosty, I could say like Oz, tell me all of my scheduled jobs, and it could run some CLI commands with the coding agent, go look at this cloud environment, and then give me an answer. We also have a web UI, so you can go to like oz.warp.dev, and you can look at all of your agents that are running, again, without like opening a terminal at all. So because it was this different thing that didn't really need like the Warp terminal to work, we just kind of made it its own entity that the Warp team uses internally to build everything. So it's very authentic to us. Like we built this because we had very real needs internally. And we also wanted to make it accessible enough that no matter what you're doing, if you're using like open code inside of anywhere or using the Pi harness, you can still tap into this platform and trigger cloud agents, introspect what's going on, and all of that stuff. So that's kind of like a high level. I don't know if there's anything that I could like tap into or explain a little bit more clearly.
I was sort of curious when you say I trigger off the agent in the cloud to do something, how can I still use tools like OpenClaw or OpenCode and Claude Code in that agent? Does it just sort of trigger it on the sandbox environment up there?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the way environments work is very flexible. because it's just set up as like a Docker file and whatever code you want to clone inside of there. So I've noticed some other tools like the Codex app and Cursor, may still be true for Cursor, need to check in, is like it taps to a single coding repository and spins up the environment around that. So it's very like one click, like boom, you have this GitHub repository in the cloud now. But it means if you want an agent to work on a task that touches a bunch of repositories, you can't really do that. Like you would need to trigger a different agent in each repository to do each part of the work. So we made it a lot different. Like we have environments internally that have like 4 or 5 repositories cloned inside of it, like the database schema and the server and the client and the docs. Like all of those are in the same environment. So if I ask an agent, I need to make this schema change, it could make PRs across all those environments all at once. And it just runs an agent generically across this code base in order to accomplish it. The only thing we're helping you with is triggering it to start working inside of this sandbox and also to get artifacts back out. So if it made a pull request, we can actually detect that and show you a link to the pull request instead of you hunting through the agent logs to figure that out. Now, the question you were saying about can I run open code with this? The answer is yes, actually, but we want to make it a lot cleaner. So right now, like the turnkey, if you read the docs and you do it, it's going to be using Warp's agent. So you're going to like set up some cloud credits. You're going to use the Warp agent. You can pick whatever model you want and all of your permission models. So you could flip it to any of the models that you would expect to support. Like if you want to use Opus versus Codex, you can do that. But if you want to switch out the harness, that involves like cloning the CLI into the Docker environment. So you like add a little installation instruction of install Claude Code here or install Open Code. And then when the environment's spun up, now Open Code's available. And at least today, you could tell the agent, delegate everything to Open Code, and then all the compute runs through that instead. So you can do that. We would like to make it a little bit cleaner, though, where if you just say, like, my preference is to use Open Code, and I don't even want delegation, like, that's something that we could explore. We've also played with, like, being able to delegate to multiple harnesses. So, like, I want the docs to be updated by Claude Code, and I want the code to be updated by the Codex harness. Like, you can actually do that, and then it spins them both up in parallel, watches the results, and then reports the artifact back out. So you can kind of stitch these things together in really creative ways. It's not tied to specifically using, like, Warp for the full agentic flow end-to-end. And we do have like open source resources for this right now, but we are trying to make that like even cleaner. So this could be like a general purpose sandbox. And really we're just giving you the tools to set up those environments and inspect and manage everything the agents are doing when they're done.
Oh yeah, that sounds good. It answers my question because I think I'm still in the stage at the moment, as I said, where I bounce between a lot of the tools, testing them out. I mean, mainly because uniquely we make a lot of YouTube videos on these types of things. So I'm installing sort of the newest, latest thing that everyone's talking about every week. And yeah, I was curious if that would fit into the workflow.
Yeah, totally. And I'll send some stuff along to you because I don't think we've had anyone testing those sorts of flows yet outside of our internal team. So I want to see that get used. Because yeah, there's so many harnesses right now. Like Pi has come on my radar. It's like everyone's talking about this. I'm surprised how quickly that caught on Steam. But isn't that like a general purpose harness as well? Like you could bring whatever model you want to it and it just lets you extend it?
I think so, wasn't it? Didn't OpenClaw use a bit of Pi or something? And obviously OpenClaw got trending massively. And then, yeah.
Yes,
I need to check out Pi as well. I've been meaning to for a while.
Yeah, I know it's the harness that's like the default if you use OpenClaw now. And it's the one that Peter, the creator of OpenClaw, uses to work on code. But I know he's a Codex user, so that has me guessing it's very general purpose and pluggable. But we are entering this age of like, I don't know, the harness doesn't matter as much as it used to. You can kind of use whatever harness you want to talk to these things. Like the difference between asking Warp a question through Codex and asking Open Code a question through Codex is really small difference. Like we could argue we have a slightly better system prompt and that's why it gets 1% better on benchmarks. But I don't know. I feel like the model matters a lot more than the harness. It's really just come down to like pricing models, honestly, of like why you pick one harness over another. And some of it's the extensibility. I've heard people saying I like Pi because I can like change the interface that I'm looking at and like add a diff view here and whatever. So it became this like Lego set for people to build around, which is very cool.
Curious if you ever tried OpenClaw when that was trending.
I still haven't set up an OpenClaw box. I still haven't set one up. Oz is kind of like, because we were actually playing with internally, could you put OpenClaw on one of these Oz sandboxes and have it run? And the answer is like, yes, but we set these things up to be serverless, quote unquote. Like once it's done with the task, even if it takes hours, it spins down. OpenClaw is supposed to be like this always listening assistant. So it's like, yeah, you could have OpenClaw run for a period of time. But the idea of like having a server I can talk to all the time, I mean, it's cool. Do you use it? And what do you use it for?
I tried it when it was trending on just seeing if I could make it do some of my workflows sort of on its own, like researching on Twitter, scrolling through Twitter and tweets and seeing opinions on things because, Twitter's search API is not great. So I wanted something to replace that and just sort of researching a load of things on the webs, running arbitrary scripts that I'd ask it for. But yeah, I used it when it was a massive security nightmare. So I quickly spun it down because I was like, I don't want to deal with any of this anymore. And I have seen on Twitter, obviously, a lot of people say you get advertised that OpenClaw is like this magic solution, but the people who have really good workflows with OpenClaw have done a lot behind the scenes to actually get those workflows working well for them, whether that's prompting, setting up scripts, automations, everything. So yeah, I like it, but I don't think it was the initial like one-click install and then it's this magic box that can do everything. It takes a lot more work and sort of overlooking and hand-holding before you get it perfect.
It's good to know. I mean, that checks out with how all these agentic tools have really worked for me. Like even just working on side projects, I still have to really think hard about how I'm instructing Codex and reviewing its code. It's not as simple as I ask and the app looks exactly how I want it to look. I do need to try it though, OpenClaw specifically, because we do have some people internally that use it a lot. We have more and more Slack bots that are set up for like competitive analysis and all these things. For jobs like that, where it's like do a weekly research report on X, not X.com, but could be. It's really nice to use one of these like cloud agent tools like Oz, where it just kind of spins up once a week. It computes for like 10 minutes, does a bunch of web searches, and then spins down and then gives you a report. For stuff like that, it's really nice. So I think for like proactive agents that like do things for you, I think these sandbox tools are going to be a lot more relevant. The ones that are always interactive is going to be a different story. Like the fact that OpenClaw, I could text it at any moment and it would start doing work is kind of like this next step that I haven't even taken. I don't think a lot of developers have taken either, but I feel it coming, whatever it's going to end up being. Once we figure out the security.
My main selling points of OpenClaw was the fact that you can sort of run it on your own server and have whatever you wanted on there, because I just put it on like a Ubuntu install. But yeah, I'm not at the point that I'd put it on my personal computer yet. That is a security nightmare for now.
Yeah, I don't think it was ever meant to.
No. Yeah. People were buying Mac Minis for that one, which was crazy.
Considering it.
I was going to say, back to your point about harnesses and that didn't make a difference. I think a while back, Anthropic made it so that you had to use Claude Code to use your Pro or Max subscription. And I think Warp has always offered Sonnet, Opus, and everything else that the Claude models that Anthropic have. How have you been able to like make money from those models, even though they're so expensive to run?
Yeah, it's tough with like what's going on with price subsidization and all of that, because it's become very apparent that all these model providers are losing a lot of money just with the amount of compute that they're pouring over developers. And it's usually like the power users that create the biggest offset. Like I heard it was like power users using 2,000 a month in inference and paying 200, and that's why they were sort of stripping back who can access those plans. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think people are aware, like Warp changed our own pricing model from a deeply subsidized one to one that's sustainable. So at least for us, like we've priced it where there's a bit of advantage to like paying a 20 a month instead of just paying for API keys. But it's not at the level of we lose 10x on our users. It's at a level of we can break even, maybe make like a little profit. We're not trying to go crazy. It's a balancing of the scales. But we have just tried to put it in a place where we're not going after something that will just run out in like a year or so, while other companies have positioned themselves where they don't do that. So it's really just a difference of what's practical and what you can do. And when you're in that position, like, that's why we're really open to people using Claude Code and OpenCode and other things inside of Warp, and us making that a really nice experience and focusing more on how can we add features that are valuable if you're doing that, like a diff view or a file explorer. How can we help you put those things in the cloud with cloud runners? So we really just become like a helper for environment setup, compute, management, artifacts, all that stuff. And if you want to use Warp's built-in agent, like, as I mentioned, the pricing is like a fair, sustainable thing. But it gives you like multi-model support, and just being able to ask a question in your terminal without opening a CLI is convenient. So people use it for like certain classes of tasks, even if they don't use it for everything. So we have that balance going that I feel like makes a lot of sense. It's just leaning into what people are using and listening and just making it a little bit nicer.
How does the billing of Oz work? Is it based on how long a task takes in the environment?
Yeah, I need to make sure on that. I know that we're doing it with like cloud credits because the blessed path is using Warp's harness to do everything. The like using other coding agents is like a chapter we're exploring and is possible using a Docker file. So I feel like we're working out what that model would be if that's kind of like the way people start using it. I want to say it's based on compute, but I'll make sure on whether it's like time or compute based. It's whatever makes the most sense.
What kind of things do you have for Warp coming in the future that you can talk about?
Oz is kind of the next chapter that we're playing with, making it nicer to use. I do think multi-harness is kind of the future. I think orchestration is the future. We put out a little teaser from Zach's account, our CEO, if you go find it on Twitter, where we're playing with a /orchestrate command. And it's pretty neat. Like if you do just this magical, it's not really a skill, it's kind of like a prompt. It will ask the agent to work on a task, figure out a delegation plan. So not just like an implementation plan, but actually here's how I would divide it up. Here's who could work on each thing. So it's almost becoming a product manager where you give it a feature it needs to build. It figures out here are the sub-agents I'm going to kick off. And then it creates all of those sub-agents. And through message passing, it's able to talk to those sub-agents while they work. Kind of like coworkers talking to their manager on Slack as they're doing stuff, or even talking to each other. So it's a very early experiment. We want to evaluate like if agents have better success by delegating to sub-agents versus just doing it all itself. Like, I think that's a really big divide right now of agent swarms, agent teams, all this stuff. Is that beneficial versus like the quality of output? But this is the first example I've seen in the wild that's really like, here's a turnkey solution to just have an agent delegate everything. And also here's a like standard, well, not really like a open standard or anything yet, but like a standard for message passing where like while a sub-agent's working on something, it can actually message out, this thing went wrong and I don't understand this. And the main agent can actually pick that up and say, oh, that makes sense. Let me research. Here's an answer. And it can actually like sort of ping back and forth. It can also like when an agent's done, it can tell the main agent I finished my task. Then the main agent can tell all the other agents, hey, this guy's done with this part of the task. If you want to merge that in or whatever, you can do that. So it's this really weird world of now you don't have a human that's managing agent communication. Now agents are managing their own communication strategies. I don't know how I feel about that. Like, how much of us are we going to replace at this point? But if it leads to higher quality by dividing things up that way, which in the workplace it does, so I feel like that could scale down to agents. That's kind of the next chapter that we and a bunch of other people are looking at, is how do you orchestrate this stuff?
When you said using multi-harness, is that like using various harnesses for one task or using different harnesses entirely?
Oh, yeah. So the way that we've set it up right now is like, and it doesn't have to work this way, but like each agent is working independently on a task and they could be a separate model, but they're all using the Warp harness in our testing that we've done so far. There's no reason it has to be though. Like we've played with especially with like Oz Cloud runners, like delegate this to the Claude Code harness, delegate this to the Codex harness, and then give it the same. We could, in theory, give it the same like message passing to sort of message back from those harnesses instead. But as I kind of mentioned earlier, I don't expect it to be this huge difference in quality because the model is like 90% of the difference. And the harness is kind of like the last 10% that you can experiment with and get some gains. So I feel like that'll be the step 2 of like, oh, if we mix up harnesses as well as models, does that lead to interesting results? So all of this is like experimental phase. Like, can we evaluate this and actually benchmark it and figure out what the best deployment strategy is?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it'd be interesting to find out your results from doing orchestration or doing multiple sub-agents, because I read an article somewhere from Cognition last year who said they don't recommend having multi-agents purely because the sub-agents don't have the same context as the main agent, and so it won't produce the results in the same way, and so trying to kind of merge all those results from different agents together might not work as well as if you have the same agent doing all the tasks. But it would be good to know what you guys find out.
Yeah, and I feel like that came out in the previous sub-agent architecture, which was very hands-off. It's kind of like if a product manager set up the linear board, everyone worked on their ticket and never talked to each other ever again until all the PRs are merged. Like, yeah, I would think in a workplace where no one talks to each other, you wouldn't get great results. But because we've added like this message passing ability where people could talk to each other, we've also made sure there's a plan. So every agent can see this like delegation document that live updates. Like the main agent can update this document and everyone can go read it. Like now we're adding more context passing where they can pass necessary context to each other and also agree on what everyone is working on, which I think is a much different test than the old sub-agent model of delegate and come back with no channel in between.
I was going to switch the topics a bit and sort of ask how you're just personally coding for side projects. I've seen you've been working on a Markdown editor recently, and I wonder sort of what tools do you use? Has it been mostly AI writing that code, or sort of you hand-holding it, or are you going sort of, I know some developers go a manual approach and sort of don't want to use AI so they can still do sort of have a bit of fun coding?
So you might be surprised. I use Warp to work on this. I know. So no, I definitely thought about like, should this project be an escape where this is my safe place to just write code manually and just kind of go that way? But quickly I remembered like the reason I didn't work on this is because the very nitty gritty details of working on text editing and the prose mirror library, which is notoriously so hard to use. It's really hard. Even though I've used it for a long time, it's still very difficult. I thought, yeah, a coding agent will actually push me through and let me focus with like a more balanced approach on design and development. Because normally working on side projects, it was like 10% in the design space, which I love. I still like opening Figma and designing everything myself. And then 90% was trying to figure out the implementation. Now it's more 50-50 or even less, which is a much nicer balance for me. So I designed a lot of things in Figma still. I know some people just code it all out, never use Figma again. I still like to be able to like draw out the gradients and the shadows and make it feel the way that I want to. But from there, yeah, I delegate everything to Codex right now. I mentioned earlier, like Codex is the more reasoned developer and Opus is the more jump to a solution developer. That's more me. So I want someone that can balance out my crazy. And I feel like Codex is that model of like, this one will actually care about how this thing's architected more than me. So I should probably balance with that. So a lot of it's just Codex tasks. I don't even use work trees. I have 2 clones of the repo and I just hop between them. And I can't really do more than 2 at the moment just because the project's so early that I can't delegate huge swaths of work without agents stepping on each other. So I just have like 2 agents that work on stuff. And I switch between the dev servers to look at the output. I have used cloud agents a bit just to like do a research task and then pull it down locally. So in Oz, if you like spin up a cloud agent, it'll like clone that GitHub repository, do some work. Then there's a fork locally button where I can pull it all down and then resume. So I started doing that a bit for like, I want to research how like the popover API works so I can create like a nice hover whenever you're over a hyperlink. So I just kicked off a cloud agent, go research that, get the libraries, get an initial implementation. I'll pull it down and get it done. That way I don't have to make another clone or another work tree. It's really what you make of it, but that's really been my workflow. And I do dive a lot into the code review, especially because in text editing, Codex it's not a solved problem. Like Codex still kind of struggles and messes things up in Prose Mirror. And I have to ask it questions about like, why did you make this choice? What is the limitation we're working around here? Because this is another prompting tip. Don't tell it, why are you so dumb? I know best. Just ask it, why did you make that choice? And then it will tell you, oh, it's because of this library that I read about, or there's this edge case elsewhere in the code base that I had to work around. Like you have to pull information out of a model to actually figure out what it's doing wrong. So that's the strategy I use of like staying in the loop. Ask it questions if things look weird. Otherwise, ask it to like review its code and merge it automatically. And I just push everything to the main line when it's done because it's just purely local for me right now. So it's not really like a team level strategy. It's more of like a solo strategy. Push things to main, clone the repo a couple times, use one coding model, maybe use a cloud sandbox if you want to do something off of your machine, but you don't really need to. And that's mostly it. So I'm also live streaming this process, by the way. On Twitch Tuesday mornings, just to have it be a little bit in public while I'm working on this stuff.
I'm going to ask you a question that I ask most guests that come, but do you have any hot takes?
I feel like I've already said some. I don't know. I do think work trees are a bit overrated, but I think it's because I haven't tried them enough, or I had a bad experience with them, and I need to try it again. Kind of cold take is review your code. These agents aren't good enough to just like merge right away, and you will feel the pain later.
What about like CodeRabbit and Greptile? Do you not trust those to review code?
Because it's a funny relationship of like, why do we also need a code review on the back end if the coding agent already wrote the code? And I mean, it's the same thing. I hate comparing agents to humans so much, but it is trained on how we work. So it is going to do some similar stuff. And for me, I only catch issues when I'm about to hit the button of ask this person for review. Like before that point, my code, I'm like, this is fine. Then as soon as I'm about to hit the button of I need to request a review from this senior engineer, I'm like, maybe I should look at it again. Maybe just like once. And then I catch things all the time. Because I feel like these agents are modeled to like do the bare minimum to accomplish the task with just enough quality to say mission accomplished. Like that's how they're kind of trained to do things. But that doesn't include, did I simplify all the stacks surrounding it? Did I look for potential for abstractions that are outside of all the code that I researched? Like it doesn't do all of that stuff, because if it did, then the iteration loop would be a lot longer. And so I'm sure some of the way these models are trained is it's going to be a lot more obnoxious to use if we bake in all of this self-reflection and self-correction into it. And so they don't. And we need to have tools like code review on the back end or skills to simplify your code in order to compensate for that. So it feels like, yeah, we need code review on the other side in order to ensure that. Now, what does that mean for, like, do humans need to review code in the long term? I feel like there might come a time where we don't, and I don't know what that's going to look like yet. I don't know if that means like we need different models, as we were talking about earlier. Like we need a model that thinks differently to review the code so that we get a better mix of opinions. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe agents are able to self-merge their PR if another agent reviewed and they address the comments. Maybe, I don't know. It feels wrong, obviously, because that's the final stand that a human has right now is at least I'm involved at the gate of letting things in. So I feel like it makes sense why the code review is required, because it's not trained to do all this stuff right away. It can be accomplished either through code review or like I saw Claude Code put out a /simplify command recently. I've been cooking up my own as a skill. It's really nice to have that sort of thing. Both of those are the same way to address the problem. Have it do multiple passes with a lens for get it work and then a lens for get it right. And it's really just a matter of training it in more, maybe as like a hook. Maybe it's baked straight into the post-training for certain reasoning models. Like maybe there's extra high reasoning that explicitly does that. But yeah, it is kind of funny because you were mentioning like code wrapping and greptile. Like we built our own with Oz as well, where it just triggers a Cloud Agent as a GitHub action and reviews the code. And we open source the skill for that. If you want to apply it to Copilot or apply it to Oz, you can do whatever you want. We've kind of hit a point where it's like, yeah, code review is just one of countless places an agent could review the code. I feel like you could do it in GitHub, you could do it locally, you could do it wherever. And it's really just a matter of making a code review process that you like. And I do think code wrapping and greptile are like super focused on this problem, which is so cool. But I do also think we're in a world now where you could build your own, and it could run locally or it could run in the cloud. And you can build it to exactly your preferences at this point because the models are so good. That's why we're leading into like, yeah, we have a code review example, but you could also apply this anywhere else in the stack or write your own. Like at this point, it doesn't really matter because the models are good enough that you could just do that.
Should we give Ben a chance to plug something if he wants?
Oh, yeah. Sure. What do you want to plug, Ben?
What do I want to plug? Oz.dev. Go over there, Cloud Runners, all that stuff. Personal side, we were talking about like content and whiteboard videos, trying to be as open as possible with all the strategies to use agents to write code more effectively or just to be a good software developer in general. So if you're part of that community, I'm around Twitter, Blue Sky, YouTube, and a number of other places at bholmesdev. I'm sure there's a link for that. Holmes is in Sherlock Holmes. So if you ever want to come find me, ask follow-up questions from this or anything else, I'm around.
Cool. I think you mentioned on the podcast, sorry, I was meant to wrap up, something about Doctor Who jokes. Are you a Doctor Who fan?
Did I mention Doctor Who jokes? I mean, I am. Definitely back in high school. That was the big era. David Tennant era, Matt Smith era. That's what I grew up on. So yes.
Sure. But not anymore.
Yeah, I haven't tapped back in recently. I don't know.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Better Stack podcast. Find us wherever you listen to your podcast. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we're there. And from me, it's goodbye.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.